Hey guys, what's going back to the video? In this video, guys, my spoiler-free review for Elvis. Elvis Presley rises to fame in the 1950s while maintaining a complex relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Now, before we get into it, if you guys are new here and you enjoy all my TV show and movie reviews as well as my reactions and breakdowns, make sure to subscribe button and notifications on so you don't miss any time I upload a new video or I go live. But those give more time, let's get into it. So I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm not the biggest biopic guy. I'm not an avid watcher of biopics. I've seen a handful of them and I enjoy some of them, but I will say this one was particularly entertaining just because of the story that they chose. They specifically decided to talk about the relationship between Elvis's manager and himself, and I thought that was a pretty interesting way to go. I mean, Elvis has had a pretty crazy life, so there's a lot they could have talked about, and I thought it was interesting that they chose this. I didn't know anything going into this movie about the movie other than that it was about Elvis Presley. I stayed away from almost all trailers. I barely knew that Tom Hanks was in this movie. I literally only knew from the poster. I stayed away from advertising of this movie as much as I possibly could because personally, I don't even know Elvis that much. I've never really listened to his music. I've never really been someone that's known too much about him. All I know is how he died and where his music came from, and I'll just leave it at that. I know there's a lot of debate surrounding that, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but getting back to the story, I really like how they dramatized it, and I liked how they implemented this manager story and how they made that the center of the drama. But my biggest issue with the story overall is that it did feel very surface level. Like, they have a lot of events packed in this movie. I mean, it's almost 3 hours long, but it feels like they just graze over a lot of very important and pivotal moments in Elvis's career, or at least moments that they build up so much towards in this movie. And then once you get there, it's kind of anticlimactic. It feels super surface level, or it kind of feels like they're just dancing around what really happened in certain events. What I'm specifically mentioning is how they graze over him stealing music, and it's not necessarily called stealing in the movie. People in real life, we have debates on whether he actually stole music or not, whether it was inspired and all that kind of stuff. And so again, I don't want to get into that debate, but it felt like they were about to get into it and then they kind of shied away from it. And I kind of wish that they just went all in with it. I mean, they started the story like that. They gave us great backstory on Elvis. And honestly, to me, it just felt like they went as far as they needed to go to be acceptable, to be a true telling of the story without getting into the nitty gritty. And I feel like getting into the nitty gritty of all those different things would have made the movie a lot more dramatic without all of that extra flair that they needed. Though this movie had a lot more I felt like it could have explored on, I think what they gave us was really good. And the main reason for that is just the main character's performance. Austin Butler plays Elvis here, and he is absolutely perfect in this role. I was really doubting Austin Butler as Elvis. And again, I didn't see any of the marketing, so that kind of goes in my favor, where I didn't really know what I was getting into with Austin Butler as Elvis. I had seen clips on TikTok of him in interviews, him still having the voice, and it just wasn't giving me good vibes. But after watching this movie, he is phenomenal. He gives an absolutely Oscar-worthy performance. He honestly gives probably the best performance of 2022, right in front of Alexander Skarsgård, Ke Huy Quan, and Tom Cruise. And what I really love about his performance as Elvis is that it doesn't feel like an impersonation of Elvis. It feels like he is Elvis, and I don't know how to properly describe that, but I think you guys will understand. Like, when someone is like mimicking an actor or someone's voice or their tonalities, like, you can tell it's mimicking them. It's not exactly there. Something is off. But he just completely felt like Elvis to me. And I think that's in part to the pacing of this movie. I definitely feel like in the second half of this movie, they really dive into that show business Elvis in comparison to the first half of the movie, where it felt a little bit more like the human elements of Elvis were coming out. So I think more in the second half, I felt so engaged into Austin Butler's performance, and I really like what they did there. But I do have an issue with the pacing as a whole. Like I said, in the second half, Austin Butler really convinced me that he was Elvis. And as a whole, the pacing is good in this movie because Austin Butler's performance is consistent throughout. But I will say it is just 3 hours long. Like, that by itself, it's very hard for me to be engaged at the movie for all 3 hours. And Elvis didn't change that for me. I don't know what it was. By the end, I was so ready to to get out of my seat. That doesn't mean the movie was bad. Again, it's just 3 hours long, and a great lead performance can only do so much for that. There's nothing too specific about the pacing, but in general, I definitely felt like the beginning was way too fast. I wanted to get to know this younger Elvis and his origin, and then I felt like the ending was just way too long, and I felt like they were preaching to the audience more than actually telling their story like they were for the first 2 hours and 30 minutes of this movie. I will also say though, the editing helped a lot, especially in the beginning of the movie, to really get me fully engaged. You had Tom Hanks narrating basically this entire movie, but in the first little section, he hooks you right away, and the editing is so fast-paced, and it was so epic and grand, and way more epic and grand than I actually ever imagined it would be. And so I really liked what Baz Luhrmann did in this movie with his editing style. He has so much flair, there's so much style, emphasis, and the production is just absolutely insane. And honestly, Baz Luhrmann's direction in this movie is just simply perfect. Like I said before, the editing sometimes makes the pacing of this movie very inconsistent. The beginning is super fast, super epic, and super grand, and then the second act gets very slow, and then the third act feels like a completely different movie, where instead of watching an Elvis movie, it feels like Tom Hanks is just preaching to you about Elvis. But the editing itself, just the way that they transition between scenes, transition between all these different time periods and different moments in Elvis's life, I really like the way that the editing brings it all together, and I think Baz Luhrmann did a great job with it. I think it creates this upbeat environment of the movie with style and just a nice oomph to everything. It feels like everything just really hit, and I definitely think that's one thing that really carries this movie overall, is just the insane style, the costume design, the music, the flair, everything just works really well, and I think that's what's going to put this movie on top of a lot of other biopics for other people. This one just, it had that movie star aura, I guess. But in terms of the other cast members in this movie, I thought everyone was pretty good. I know that people didn't like Tom Hanks's acting, but I actually loved it a lot. His character was hateable, but that was the whole point. He was very over the top, but I really liked it. He reminded me of Jared Leto from House of Gucci, but the performance is actually good to me. Oof. Cody Smith-McPhee and Dak Montgomery were also in this movie, and other good performances were there as well, but those are the two standouts from just the other general cast. Overall, I thought the cast held their own in this movie. I don't think they did anything super spectacular. Tom Hanks was a great pick, in my opinion, for the manager, and again, that feud is really what carries this movie, and the acting from Tom Hanks, and that over-the-top acting to go with Austin Butler's performance as Elvis, it was just perfect. So as a whole, Elvis is a good movie, but most of the time it's just too surface level. Austin Butler gives the best performance of 2022, and by a long shot, so that alone is worth watching the movie, in my opinion. There's a lot of style and flair to this movie, and depending on if you can sit through a 3-hour epic, it might be worth the watch. Overall, I'm gonna give Elvis a 7.5 out of 10. And again, remember, I'm not the biggest fan of biopics, so if you are, I'm pretty sure you will absolutely love the hell out of this movie. But guys, that's it for my thoughts on Elvis. If you've seen or want to check out Elvis, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.